The House will come to order. Representative Moran, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Madam Speaker and members, I would like to excitingly invite you to the Minority Entrepreneur Legislative Reception today downstairs in the vault between 4:30 and 7. You should have a sheet of paper on your desk. And this reception is to connect you to the minority business owners and learn about their businesses and their opportunity. So if you have any time between 4:30 and 7 o'clock to sneak downstairs to the basement, please do. Thank you.
Calendar for the bill, the day, the first bill in the calendar for the day is House File 2314, or sorry, Senate File 2314. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2314, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government appropriating money for environment and natural resources, the third engrossment.
Representative Hansen, would you like to put the House language in your bill before you present?
Why, Madam Speaker, yes, I would.
The clerk will present the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment, as follows, and the amendment is coded DEA 2209.
Representative Hansen, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the DE amendment is the House file that we're putting into the Senate file. I'd ask for your support.
Any discussion to the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Representative Hansen, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. To the bill as amended, this is the Omnibus Environment Finance Bill. It provides funding for the Department of Natural Resources, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the Board of Soil and Water Resources, the Minnesota Zoo, the Metropolitan Council on Water and Parks, Explore Minnesota Tourism, the Conservation Corps, and the Science Museum. I want to recognize Team Environment who've been working on this, both the nonpartisan staff who we couldn't do without, Janelle Taylor and Bob Eloff from House Research, fiscal analyst Brad Hagemeyer, committee administrator Peter Strohmeyer, committee legislative assistant Clay Schwartzwalter, partisan researchers Margaret Zadra and Amy Zipko, and our pages Allie Michaels and Amanda Schnabel, and all of our committee members. I also want to personally thank Representative Fabian because the persistent asking questions in committee helps us make a stronger product. So I appreciate your work and the passion that the members of the minority party bring to the committees, and look forward to the next year. I also want to recognize I have 2 interns who, those of you who got trees last week, Max Poplin and Scotland Cracker from McAllister bagged and tagged all those trees for you. So I want to thank them for their work during this session. So stand up, guys. Members, the Omnibus Finance Bill is a problem-solving bill. I mentioned the finances that are involved. This bill has $356.7 million in it, an increase of $32.558 million in general fund from the base. And it also has appropriations for a variety of dedicated accounts. For those of you who worked in the natural resources area, or those of you who are new to it, there are a variety of accounts for natural resources in a variety of agencies. And it takes a bit to work on them. We also have a wide range of acronyms that we use, both for the agencies and describing things. So the things that I want to highlight in this bill, going through some acronyms: AIS, Aquatic Invasive Species. We provide increased dedicated dollars for solving aquatic invasive species problems and providing ongoing research to the University of Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center. Emerald ash borer, and you're having a emerald ash borer identification tag being handed out. It's been 10 years, members, 10 years since emerald ash borer was first identified in Minnesota. And we have not spent a lot of state money. I want those of us who are a certain age to just remember back to Dutch elm disease and the statewide focus that responded to Dutch elm disease. In this bill, for the first time, we are having a comprehensive approach to emerald ash borer. We're providing for additional tree planting, which has a carbon sequestration goal that helps overall with climate, but we also provide grants to local units of government to help deal with dead and decaying trees. In the tax bill, we had a provision that would help collect those trees and wind damaged trees and deal with energy. So for emerald ash borer, EAB, we have new and comprehensive effort at trying to deal with that I hope can continue into the future. Finally, for CWD, chronic wasting disease, and we had some of that discussion in the earlier bill. In this bill, we have $4.4 million for dealing with chronic wasting disease, not only with the Department of Natural Resources for responding to the outbreak, but also with the Pollution Control Agency to try to deal with how do we deal with carcasses wherever they come from. So there's an Adopt a Dumpster program in there to help deal and to have the agencies working together on how to deal with carcass disposal of white-tailed deer. We also provide money for the University of Minnesota to be working on research with chronic wasting disease. So there's $4.4 million for chronic wasting disease in this bill. And then finally, there are provisions in here relating to pollinators, both in the urban and suburban area with a Lawns to Legumes program, but also for farmers to provide an incentive through the soil and water districts for landowners who are enrolling in the Conservation Reserve program to help get pollinator habitat on the land. So those are some of the things in here relating to AIS, EAB, CWD, and bees. There are a variety of other provisions in here relating to helping protect our firefighters, helping respond to environmental concerns relating to air quality, water quality. It is a comprehensive bill affecting each of the agencies that are mentioned. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I would go to the amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended as follows, and the amendment is coded A29.
The member from Dakota, the author of the bill, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the A29 amendment is some technical corrections and clarifying language relating to definitions of Cisco and Tullabes and the wild turkey account, and clarifies training exercises at Camp Ripley are not subject to the firefighting foam requirements. I'd ask for your support.
Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the Hansen amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Marquardt moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A27.
The member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. And before I start on the amendment, I want to thank Representative Detmer for those very kind words earlier today and for being a big part of the award for me. And Representative Detmer is a Hall of Fame recipient himself. So thank you so much, and also thank you to the body for the very nice recognition. That was above and beyond the call of duty, and I very much appreciated that. Members, the A27 amendment deals with that when farmers lift their sugar beets out of the ground during harvest, they will take them to temporary storage or piling sites. And they will stay there a little bit before they're then moved to the processing plants. And a lot of these sites will have stormwater ponds, water ponds. After it rains, it will collect water and so forth. And what this amendment would say is that they would not need an engineered liner in these ponds unless there was a risk assessment that had taken place that would deem that there'd be a threat to groundwater. And this is really an agreement between the MPCA and the MNDAC Farmers Cooperative, and I think it's a very good practical approach to making sure that we protect the groundwater, but at the same time not forcing unnecessary costs onto our farmers. So members, I would ask for your support of the A27 amendment.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would encourage adoption of the amendment.
Representative Backer.
Yeah, Madam Speaker and members, I would support this amendment because one of the things that we have to realize is for those of you who don't see the piles out there of sugar, piles of sugar, is what's on the sugar beet is black dirt. And when it rains, it's no different than if it's raining in the field. So in essence, what we see out in my district, and Representative Marquardt's district, Representative Faven, and others up and down the River Valley, is these big piles. And next to the piles are sugar beets fields. So it can rain there, help the sugar beets grow, but then what happens is if they put it in a pile, it rains, washes the dirt off. Now that becomes somehow a pollutant, and it's just black dirt mixed with rain. So unfortunately, we have to have these type of this type of amendment so we don't put such unnecessary burden on our farms. This is one of the reasons we see bigger and bigger farms, because as we know, the family farm can't put up with these type of regulations. Now you might say, well, this isn't a regulation on farmers. It is indirectly, because obviously the farmers have to get their product to market, and this is how they store it. So this is a common sense amendment, and we support that too. Thank you, Representative Marquardt.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A27 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Heinzman moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment, as amended, and the amendment is coded A8.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment is pretty straightforward. Provides a voluntary online ATV training for kids age 6 through 9. It requires that the parent or guardian is present for hands-on ATV training if the child is under 10. There's also a provision that would allow an ATV to be equipped with a snorkel device. That's kind of a long definition if I was to go through what that is, but bottom line, many ATVs are already equipped from the factory that way, and this eliminates a hardship to a lot of folks. I'd appreciate support.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support the amendment and would encourage its adoption.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the the A8 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment, as amended. The amendment is coded A7.
Representative Nash, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this was a provision in last year's bill. This is for a friend of mine and a lot of folks around our state who are a special needs person who hunts with their parents, and then they turn 18, and there's really no provision in law for them to be able to continue to hunt. We worked on this with the DNR. They are supportive of this. And I really hope that we can gain your support. And Madam Speaker, I know that Representative Becker-Finn has an amendment to this amendment.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Becker-Finn moves to amend the Nash Amendment to Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A38.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So my amendment involves when someone with a physical disability shoots a deer and is physically unable to then dispatch the animal. So for instance, you're hunting with Representative Herr, you use a wheelchair, and the injured deer goes into the woods. Representative Herr would then legally be able to dispatch that deer for you. Urge your support.
Discussion to the amendment to the amendment. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Representative Nash, to your amendment
Yes,
as
thank you,
amended.
Madam Speaker. I'll be brief. Members, this is a really good provision. I know that Representative Becker-Finn supports this. I think we can all vote green on this, and I appreciate your support.
Discussion, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, members, please vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment as amended, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fabian moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the 810 amendment is a bill that actually I carried in the last session, and it's one that we heard in committee this year. Representative Fu Lee had the bill, and what this does is it modifies the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Small Business Environmental Improvement Loan Program, and what it does is it just allows small businesses to be able to access the loan program over at MPCA. We're trying to help out small businesses so that they can meet more easily some of the environmental regulations that are imposed upon them. What we're doing in the amendment is raising the eligibility of small businesses from 50 FTEs to 100, and it strikes a net worth of $1 million there. It changes the interest rate to at or below 1/2 the prime rate and not to exceed 5%. And it raises the minimum loan amount, kind of an inflationary thing that we've done, from $50,000 to $75,000. I would ask for your support.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is a good amendment. I encourage a yes vote.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A10 amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Winkler moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A30.
The author of the amendment, Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker and members, former Vice President Walter Mondale deserves recognition for his work on the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and preserving the St. Croix River Valley. This amendment would honor his work in that area to conservation around the country, and I would ask for a yes vote, please.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Becker-Finn and others move to amend the Winkler Amendment to Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A19-0533.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speakers. Members, this amendment is in response to the Court of Appeals decision released yesterday regarding the official name of Bede-Makaska. The court decision indicated that this is something that the legislature can take care of, so we are doing the right thing in moving this issue forward. Members, please vote green.
Discussion to the amendment to the amendment. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Representative Winkler, to your amendment as amended. No further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Winkler amended as amended, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fabian moves to amend 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A21.
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is an issue, the A21 amendment, and basically what it would do is it's going to allow people with physical disability to have motorized access to wildlife management areas. I've raised this issue a number of times, both in committee here on the House floor and also at the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. I can look around this room and I wouldn't be surprised that there are some of you who have physical disabilities that allows you to get a handicap parking space and you've got something that you hang in your car, and some of you park in the different parking lots around here in the handicap space. Now, currently, the use of some sort of motorized vehicle in a wildlife management area is prohibited, with some exceptions. Up in the northwest corner of the state, you can use them during deer hunting season, after shooting hours and, some of the things like that. But the reason for my amendment, members, goes to something much deeper than that. If you go to the DNR website and take a look at what you have, let me pose a scenario for you. And this is a true situation that happened in my family. So it's Wednesday before the deer hunting season, and I get a call from one of my family members who says, I've never gone deer hunting before. I'd like to come deer hunting with you. And my family member doesn't have a left leg, okay? Had cancer and was amputated, hip disarticulation. So I said, great, I just built a new stand and got a couple other spots to be good for you to hunt in, and I think we could have a lot of fun together. So I called the local wildlife official and said, hey, my brother's coming up, he wants to go deer hunting. I want to know if we can get access to the WMA where the gate is on the old ditch. We call them ditch dump roads. It's a minimum maintenance road, but there's no motorized vehicle traffic allowed. So I talked to the official, and he said, well, he could, but he has to go to the doctor and get a form filled out and has to get this done. A bunch of instructions here. And then, after that, maybe we can talk about it. So I called my family member and said, Dave, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work. To do what I want you to do, you can still come up and hunt. We've got some land, some stands on my property, and you'll be okay. And he said, well, why isn't it going to work on the other spot? And I said, well, because you don't have the proper permit that the DNR has signed off on that you got from your doctor. He said, oh, no, I got one of those because I use it when I go grouse hunting. And I go someplace in the woods, stop my truck, and I can literally stick my barrel out the window and shoot the rough grouse. That's what the permit is for. You can use it for deer hunting. Hunt from a standing motor vehicle permit. He says, I got one of those. So I called the wildlife manager back and said, hey, because at first I thought this is going to take way too long to get it done and we'll never be able to do it. So I called him back, and then he said, well, now we have to fill out this other form. So long story short, members, we filled out the forms. Then they designated where he could go on the WMA. And I just think that it's overly burdensome. And one of the things that really troubles me is on the Department of Natural Resources special use permit application, power-driven mobility device on DNR land or facility, the very first line at the top says, the data provided is public information. Okay. Well, that's something we can work around. But members, here's the deal. If Representative Juergens shows up in Roseau and we want to go grouse hunting some nice Sunday afternoon, and Dave shows up and wants to come along with us on the WMA, guess what? He can't do it. And he can't walk. And he can't use crutches. You know, you're going to go along. And members, I honestly believe that we are discriminating against members in the disabled community. And this is wrong. Representative Becker Finn had an amendment a little while ago talking something about some people in the disabled community. We need to reach out. We need to make sure that these people are getting the same opportunities that we are within some reasonable limits. And I recognize that this probably isn't going to go where I want it to go this year. I've talked to Chair Hansen, and he wants to continue with this. I talked to Majority Leader Winkler about it. Anybody who is in the northern part of the state knows that the WMAs are huge. The one that's immediately adjacent to me is 6 miles wide and 4 to 5 miles deep. And how do you get up to Moose River to go along with me when we're trying to hunt a few mallards and wood ducks in the fall? This is way too restrictive. We need to make sure that the people in the disabled community, people who have handicaps, can have the same fun that most of us could have on a state wildlife management area. So I'm hoping that we can make some changes. I want to work with Chair Hansen and other people. I want to work with the DNR. Quite frankly, I'd like to work with the disabled community and see what they have to say, how we can weigh in on this. And for me, this is just common sense. The notion that, members, I really strongly encourage you to go on the website and take a look at this. Individuals with disabilities can use power-driven mobility devices unless the department can demonstrate that the class of other power-driven mobility devices cannot be operated safely without harming resources or conflict with federal laws. Then inside of here, it also says, we encourage you to contact the facility or land manager to discuss the request before you start the application process. The manager is expected to respond to you with a permit acceptance or with or without conditions or denial response within 2 weeks. Okay? We were fortunate. I knew the situation, I knew the person, and we were able to get the permit, but we shouldn't be requiring people to go through what I consider to be an overly burdensome regulatory process within the agency that is not doing justice to the members in our disabled community. Members, I ask for a green vote.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Fabian. I commit to you to work on this issue. I think we need to involve the Council for Disabilities, the Human Rights Department, the DNR, and other interested individuals throughout the state to try to. This is an important issue, so I would commit to you that we continue that conversation during the interim and into next year.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Fabian, thank you. Being a member on the House floor who has a disability, I thank you a great deal for looking out for us. And quite frankly, I think every time I go out, I probably break the law, which is very unfortunate. Simply trying to do what we love. So again, thank you for standing up for those who are in need.
The author of the amendment, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If Representative Hansen would yield to a question, please.
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hansen, we talked about this earlier, and I'd ask you to reconsider. I'd ask you to reconsider and take this amendment so that we can continue this conversation now to the conference committee, so that we can, I actually was approached by someone in the media today, and I don't want to just say that we're going to do this next year. Hey, listen, I understand it's probably going to happen next year, but I'd like to keep this conversation going this year. And members, I don't want to put you on the spot asking for a roll call, but Representative Hansen, I would ask that you take this amendment and we can continue this conversation this year. And I'm happy to work with you over the interim on that.
Further discussion to the amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Fabian, I expressed concern. There's a general concern about opening up the public lands on ATVs, but I take you at your word here that we're trying to deal with the disability community. I think we should continue that conversation, and if we can do that in the conference committee as a start, I will accept your amendment, but I want to make sure we're not opening up a broader discussion here, that we're trying to help folks who need assistance. If Representative Fabian would yield.
Representative Fabian has been asked to yield. He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hansen, I apologize. I didn't hear everything that you said at the end. If you would repeat that, I think we go to conference committee. Members, and then I would answer your question. I apologize.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Fabian, I would accept the amendment. My concern is, again, and that was why I was asking, that we've expressed a general concern about opening up the public lands to ATVs, and that you showed me, and I think you demonstrated here, that there's a variety of paperwork that's involved in this that makes it de facto very difficult for people with disabilities to even participate. And I think continuing that conversation, I think, has value, but I want to make sure we're limited to dealing with that particular issue.
And are you asking him to yield again? Yes. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, some of you know that I was a Boy Scout, so Representative Hansen, Scout's honor.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A21 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Swedzinski moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A1.
The member from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment really seeks to protect the investment that Minnesotans are making every single year. This legislature in just a couple days will be asked to make tens of millions of dollars of investment into our outdoor resources and our hunting lands and habitat for wildlife and deer and pheasants and grouse and the rest. And what this amendment simply does is allow for night vision equipment, thermal, in the hunting of coyote and fox. So under current state law, Minnesotans can go out and use regular lights and shotguns to hunt at night. And simply, this technology has really increased in the last few years. Where, from a solar standpoint, from a technology standpoint, where thermal and night vision can be used to really tell exactly what's coming in. I think Minnesota is ready for this. DNR helped write this language. They are ready for it. They felt in committee. I want to thank Representative Purcell for hearing the bill. They said it was simply time that this moves forward. This would increase penalties essentially the same penalties within the suppressor language, so that if you're using this technology outside of the bounds of the season or using to take large game, that those penalties closely mirror that. I just really wanted to bring this amendment forward so that you, as a larger body, can know about it and understand it. I want you to, if you could, the next few days to talk up to your constituents about this, because I think this is important. We're making tens of millions of dollars of investment, and to take care of the predator issues that we have, the tens of thousands of pheasants and young deer that are eaten by foxes and coyotes across this state, for the money that we're spending, that it would only make sense that we allow this technology to move forward. So with that, Madam Speaker, I'm going to pull this amendment, but I would certainly like this conversation to continue before the end of session, and my hope that it could potentially become law as we move forward. Thank you.
Representative Swedzinski withdraws the A1 amendment. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Lueck moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A2.
Representative Lueck, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What this amendment does is it would take $1 million out of MPCA operations and shift it over to the Department of Natural Resources to go to work on actually restoring our wild rice beds. This is to say it's a work in progress is an understatement. We've been working on this for a long time. And both sides of the aisle, Representative David Dill worked on this, Representative Carly Moline, Representative Tom Anzel, Representative Jason Metza, myself, Representative Lehman, Representative Eklund, Lissegard, Sandstead. We've been working on this from the northern part of Minnesota. It was triggered by a study that was done back in 2008. That's 11 years ago, at looking at our wild rice across the state of Minnesota, and there were a number of recommendations in there. Unfortunately, that's what's there, a number of recommendations. They've not been acted on, and the problem has been the dollars. We've had bills that went as far as the governor's desk over the last couple of years in an attempt to put some dollars behind this, to look across the board at what we can do to ensure that we preserve the rice beds that we have, look at where there used to be rice and where appropriate, restore it. So it's a lot of money. This would come out of MPCA operations. However, at some point in time, we just got to bite the bullet. And as one of my old friends would say, Representative Anzel, we've got to stop admiring this problem. We've been admiring it for over a decade, and we really need to broaden our horizon and particularly bring in the Native Americans. They've been working on this sort of dual track. You know, we've got the governor's wild rice report from a working group last year. We've got the tribes report. The problem here is we just need to put some dollars on the bottom line and move this forward. And I think you'll see a lot more cohesion and cooperative action. What's missing here is the funding. So with that, I would ask that we really consider about funding this.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, please vote no. Miigwech.
Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A2 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Davids moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A3.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This amendment was originally House File 953, and what it does is it would put $300,000 as requested by the county feedlot officers working with the University of Minnesota. I do thank Chair Hansen for putting it at $150,000. After talking to him, that doesn't quite do it, so we reduce the MPC general fund appropriation and we put $150,000 over into the feedlot online training, which is very important. So I'd really appreciate your support. But I do thank Representative Hansen for getting a placeholder in there. Thank you.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This takes money from the general operations for the PCA. Representative Davids, it's the half full, half empty question, and I think the $150K is a good start, so I'd ask for a no vote on the Davids amendment.
Further discussion. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, you have a choice. Do we make this program half full or fill it, or do we just take a little tiny sliver away from millions and millions of dollars over at MPCA operations? Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A3 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Heinrich moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A4.
The member from Anoka, Representative Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment would help mitigate fees on fun, because this environment bill raises fees on fun, wastes taxpayer money, and grows government. So this amendment, members, will mitigate the damage. This amendment eliminates paddle boards from the definition of watercraft and exempts them from having to pay license fees and AIS surcharge. Licensed paddle boards, really. This isn't too much different, members, than surfboard. You might stand on it or kneel or sit, and then you power it with your arms and you can go around the lake on what's not too different from a surfboard. I'm just wondering what's next, members. Are we going to have Representative Erdahl buy a license for his blow-up floating lounge chair? No. No, we shouldn't do that, members. Minnesotans don't want to pay to license a paddleboard. I really appreciate the conversation I was able to have with Chair Hansen and a few members from the other side. I thank you for that. And look forward to further conversations regarding this issue. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'll withdraw the amendment.
Representative Heinrich withdraws the A4 amendment. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fabian moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A5.
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the A5 amendment simply is putting into statute the social permit that has been talked about this year. And what it would require is the MPCA get a social permit before adopting any new standards or altering existing standards that make the standard more stringent. So, members, we've had this conversation about the social permit. I think that for me personally, it's something that has sparked a lot of conversation back home in my district. And if it's going to be good for the goose, it should be good for the gander. So I would ask for a green vote.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. We did have this conversation earlier in one of the bills sometime this last week or so. There is not a social permit. I think the reference that folks talked about was that you need to involve community in the decision making. You need to involve citizens in participation. And so I would ask for a no vote on the A5 amendment.
The member from Lyon, Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, we heard a little bit about this. We had the Commerce Department in front of the Energy Committee, and we brought this subject up. And the commissioner talked a little bit about, you know, essentially what the issue being is when the departments, which are in control of this, and the governor doesn't like the decisions they come up with, he mentioned that, well, we need to get a social permit, as in the fact that people didn't have the say. They had public hearings, they had public conversations, they did the science, they did the work. And yet when the answers didn't come out from the department and the permits were approved and permission was given, the governor said, well, we're going to go back to the drawing board, and had the opportunity to not pursue the issues in pertaining to this. And, you know, it's disappointing that we even have to have this conversation, Representative Fabian. It's frustrating. And I think that's what we're hearing from whether the northern parts of the states or across the state. And I appreciate Mr. Fabian for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, if you take a look at the amendment to Representative Hansen's comments about what a social permit is, it's actually defined. And I had a bill this year that would define a social permit. And for the purposes of this subdivision, the agency obtains a social permit when a resolution in support of a new or modified standard is adopted by the Board of County Commissioners of every county in Minnesota. I think that, members, if we're going to require these types of things of businesses and maybe cities who are upgrading their wastewater treatment facilities, this is a good way for us to allow for the people out there to have some oversight over the rulemaking. We've talked lots about rulemaking in the last few years. To have some oversight over the rulemaking to see if it actually is something that the people of the state of Minnesota want across the state, from St. Vincent, Minnesota, down to Winona, and every place in between. So, members, I would strongly encourage a green vote on the A5 amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A5 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A19-0525.
Representative Drazkowski, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, members, this amendment would remove the antler point restrictions that are imposed by the Department of Natural Resources. Members, about 7 or 8 years ago now, the legislature was debating the discussion around the DNR's activity to implement antler point restrictions then in the 300 zone in southeast Minnesota. Now, what antler point restrictions do, for those of you that aren't aware of it, they only exist in southeast Minnesota, in that in a few counties in the very southeastern most part of the state. And what that says is, if you are a hunter and you want to shoot a buck, that buck has to have 4 antler points on a side before you can squeeze the trigger on that buck. So that applies whether you're 17 years old or 87 years old. That's what the antler point restriction says. Of course, it was brought forward by some elite hunting groups that actually one elite hunting group that specifically focuses on bow hunting, a group whose membership generally has a lot of disposable income and time. They worked with, in order to persuade then our Ministry of Natural Resources here in Minnesota and their staff to bring forward this restriction. And the idea was that if the ministry would do this, it would grow the bucks bigger because less young bucks would be killed. The bucks would grow bigger and grow bigger antler sets, which I think arguably that probably does in other states and did happen. And as a matter of fact, I don't think anybody is arguing that it didn't happen. Members, in the face of chronic wasting disease, 2 things that affect it that are at play here. One is the concentration of deer in an area and them coming together in large groups, in large densities, increases the spread of the disease. Now, we have that in several of the areas, the hunting zone areas within this area in southeast Minnesota. You especially look at Fillmore County, Representative David's district, part of my district, part of Representative Pulowski's district, and even some of the Olmsted County area, where concentrations are very high. what we have seen happen in our part of the state is that the pursuit of deer beyond these smaller numbers of very large bucks are not hunted aggressively anymore. As a matter of fact, people have become disappointed in the hunt because of this restriction placed in the law, and we've actually seen hunter enthusiasm wane. We're not having the hunting pressure we need in order to kill the number of deer in those areas to decrease the populations properly. It's a struggle we've had. These deer damage the crops and provide damage to farms all around the area. And as I mentioned, it contributes to the chronic wasting disease spread in the area. The other thing that's important to note is this, that the older a deer gets, the more propensity for the accumulation and spread of the disease itself. And that's especially the case with large, mature bucks. So the more mature bucks you have, the more the disease is spread. You'd rather have younger animals because they wouldn't spread it as well. So, members, arguably the ministry has brought this upon the state of Minnesota, especially in southeast Minnesota, and contributed to our problem down there. As a matter of fact, members, the ministry says in its report that, quote, reducing the population helps minimize the spread of disease. Fewer deer means less deer-to-deer contact, reducing the risk of sick deer transmitting CWD to healthy deer. They go on to say that in the report that alternatives which, quote, could include elimination of special rules that protect specific classes of deer, example, antler point restrictions, end quote, would also help reduce chronic wasting disease in the herd in southeastern Minnesota. Members, our department, our Ministry of Natural Resources in Minnesota brought forward part of this problem. And we need to help them do the right thing and realize their mistake. We need to repeal these rules that are in statute that gives them the ability to continue on this path that they seem to, even though rhetorically they acknowledge the science says they should do that, apparently politically they don't want to. Members, Arkansas, Missouri, and Michigan have removed their antler point restrictions in counties with high concentrations of chronic wasting disease in an effort to end the spread of the disease in those states. In Arkansas, in their northwest part of their state, they had 23% prevalence in their deer herd when they decided to pull the trigger and, pun intended, members, when they decided to pull the trigger and end their antler point restrictions in their state. Members, counties in southwestern Wisconsin have chronic wasting disease prevalence in the herd of 50% in some of the counties. Now, are we going to stand around while our Department of Natural Resources continues with this rule as the ministry contributes to the problem, or are we going to direct our government in a different direction that helps us stem the spread of this very problematic disease? That's the amendment, Madam Speaker. Members, I would appreciate your support.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To set the record straight, members, APR does not apply in CWD zones. If you do care about addressing chronic wasting disease, this Omnibus bill is a great bill, as is. Members, please vote no on this amendment.
Further discussion to the amendment. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we just heard it right there. This is what I talked about a couple days ago, where we have the confined animals in the farms, where we believe that we can have policy that can address the problem with those herds. And we've struggled to find ways that we can address the problem in the herds out in the wild. We can't fence them in, we can't depopulate, we can't do all those sorts of things. Well, members, here's something that we can do. I don't see anything unrealistic about this, burdening on the hunters. I think hunters would like the opportunity. Members, if you believe, as we've been talking along, that chronic wasting disease is a problem that we need to make sure that we need to protect Minnesotans from our deer herds, from our communities, whatever you might think about this, whatever it means, the issue of chronic wasting disease, we spent a major portion of a bill the other day addressing it on the farming side, and on the wild side, we have an opportunity to address it here. I frankly cannot understand why this is so objectionable. Members, I ask for your support on this amendment.
Representative Driscowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it was said by another member that chronic wasting disease or that antler point restrictions don't exist in chronic wasting disease areas. Well, members, those chronic wasting disease areas are small areas that are carved out by the DNR in which they draw around a boundary around a small land area that is a targeted area that they aim to end chronic wasting disease by depopulating the deer in that area. They're going to bring in sharpshooters and do things like that and kill the deer in that area. So technically that's true. They suspend the antler point restrictions in that small area while it is called or termed by the ministry as a chronic wasting disease area. All of the areas around that also have very high deer density in their areas. In southeast Minnesota, in our counties, the deer herds are generally high to very high, and in areas around these chronic wasting disease, small carved out areas that Representative Becker-Finn referred to, the population is also still very high, and we still are continuing with this antler point restriction policy. Members, if you're willing, I would ask for a roll call on this amendment.
A roll call has been requested. Do I see 15 hands? I do not see 15 hands. You guys are working hard. 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Any further discussion to the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 73 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fabian moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A11.
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, one of the things that has given me some concern in the bill is the creation of the Outdoor Recreation Office. I mean, this is an expansion of government. It's growing government. Members, we're growing government in this particular bill with spending that, in this case, Minnesota Office of Tourism and the Department of Natural Resources don't want. So, and I do believe that it is somewhat underfunded from what they had asked for. In the first year, it's just a $50,000 appropriation. Now, I don't think even Representative Hertas would work for $50,000 a year. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen over there. We don't need to be doing this over at the Office of Tourism. I've worked closely with Minnesota Tourism as a chair and vice chair. They testified in committee that they don't want this created in their office. DNR has testified that we don't need to do this. But some of the things that we do need to do, and one of them that I believe strongly in, is the AIS grant programs to lake associations. So what I'm doing here in this case is I'm deleting the dollars going to create more government, government that even government doesn't want, and sending that money to the AIS grants for lake associations. We all recognize the serious nature attributed to aquatic invasive species, and this is one more tool that we can use to combat those and allow local people to be more engaged in the battle against aquatic invasive species by being able to have their local lake association apply for a grant and then go to work. I ask for a green vote.
Discussion to the amendment, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'd ask for a no vote on the A11 amendment. This bill has a lot of great provisions for aquatic invasive species. It provides a strong investment for them, and it also provides ongoing funding that's needed for the University of Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center. Members, Minnesota is changing. We have lots of new folks and folks who may not have been involved in the outdoors in the past. Why not take the risk to ask people to be involved, to invite them to participate in our outdoors? We have the No Child Left Inside provision in this bill. The Office of Outdoor Recreation is another in that attempt to try to get more people involved. We often think of the outdoors through the lens of our own involvement and how we got involved in the outdoors. And that's not always the way it is today or in the future. So why not take that risk of asking people to be involved in a different way? Why not get folks involved? And that, rather than saying, we're not going to look, we're not going to try, I think that $50,000 to start, they can be efficient in starting out with this. And this conversation is an important one as we have more and more Minnesotans who could and can and should be involved in the outdoors. I'd ask for a no vote on the A11 amendment.
Further discussion, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hansen, for trying to describe what this new growth in government would result, or not result in, but might bring about. But members, let's think about what's going to happen to Explore Minnesota when we create another part of government, when people are going to be confused because they count on Minnesota's Explore Minnesota to promote our state. And Explore Minnesota has spread its wings to a great extent over the years so that they are offering ideas on every one of these issues or purposes that are stated in subdivision 2. So I think we're going to start something that's going to be confusing for Minnesotans and for those who visit our state because they count on our Explore Minnesota. That's what's advertised across the nation. And when you're watching television, any of you who do, you see that right now we're seeing all the ads from across the nation, from other states about they're wanting us to come to their state. Wyoming is really big into advertising. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, all of our neighboring states, Wisconsin as well. Now, what is going to happen to Explore Minnesota when it also is divided into this outdoor recreation office that's going to, I think, diminish the importance of our tourism? I know this might not be the appropriate time to speak, but as long as Representative Fabian was asking to move money to AIS, I certainly want to support that in helping the lakes in our area of northern Minnesota as they experience the aquatic invasive species. So this is a really good amendment. I encourage a green vote, and I encourage you to think about how we're growing government and going to diffuse the importance of Explore Minnesota.
The author of the amendment, Representative Fabian.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the other things that's a concern of mine, well, first of all, when testimony was heard in committees and questions were asked, asking for details about what was going to happen, with all due respect to Chair Davney and so forth, there wasn't a lot of specifics, and the more questions we asked, in my opinion, the less clarity there was. You know, we have all kinds of places in state government where we are encouraging outdoor activities. I mean, that's what Minnesota is outdoor activities. And when the Explore Minnesota tourism, people come and testify and they say, please don't put this into our office. We don't want it. We don't need it. We're doing this stuff already. DNR is doing it. Our schools are doing it. Our homes, our families are doing it. Parks and Recs departments are doing it. Private property owners who own resorts and little recreation areas and so forth are doing it. We do not need to be growing government and spending money needlessly in a government program that, and I mean, sometimes I have a cold relationship with the DNR, but even the DNR says that we shouldn't be doing this, and I get that. Members, we shouldn't be doing this. And the other thing is that I raised the issue in committee about this particular provision in the bill, and I believe that according to our House rules, House Rule 4.13, that this provision in the bill should have gone to the Government Operations Committee. I asked specifically in committee for this bill, when we heard it, to be sent to Government Operations, and it was not. And members, 4.13, bills affecting state government powers and structure. The Committee of Government Operations and Elections Policy has jurisdiction over a House or Senate bill that, A, establishes or reestablishes a department, agency, commission, board, task force, advisory committee, or council, or bureau, or other like entity. Members, this bill is establishing this office. It didn't go to GovOps. Delegates rulemaking authority to or exempts from rulemaking a department or agency of state government, or substantially changes the organization of a department or agency of state government, or substantially changes, vests, or divests the official rights, powers, or duties of an official department or agency of state government or an institution under its control. Explore Minnesota Tourism is directly under the control of this committee and state government. Members, this should have been in GovOps committee. I understand rhetorically the problem that we're trying to solve here. I want kids outside just as much as anybody does. And I've talked frequently about the opportunities that exist in the part of the state that I live in. But members, this is a needless creation of another government bureaucracy that we don't need, and we shouldn't be spending the money on this, especially when we have a pressing problem like aquatic invasive species. Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call on my A11 amendment.
Roll call has been
Thank you.
requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A11 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 73 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fisher moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A16.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I am presenting this amendment today. It's a very simple amendment. What it would do is it would just ban the recreational or trophy hunting of wolves here in our state. There are several reasons why I'm offering this amendment today. Number one is there are some of our native people here, or some of our cultures, who find that the wolf is sacred to them. And one of the things that I've realized over time is that as our country, we've held our sacred animal, our bald eagle, we've protected that from hunting. And I think that's one of the things, is to be respectful of the other cultures, that we want to make sure that we're respecting their sacred animals. And so that is one part of it. The other part is that one of the things that I have found out over time is, besides the recreational hunting that has been offensive to some of the people in my district, is that I found that when we have a recreational hunt, it causes problems out with our farm community. One of the things that we have found over time is that back in 2012, 2013, when we had the wolf hunt here, while our wolf population went down by 25%, the conflicts of wolves attacking livestock the following year went up by 25%. And so I did some research on that. And one of the interesting things I found is that there have been 2 peer-reviewed studies that have been done out there, one in 2014 and one in 2018. And it found that when there was hunting of wolves, that it led to an increase in the taking of livestock. And what was found on that is that when indiscriminate hunting went into the wolf population, is it took out the alpha, female and male. And what happened is the alpha wolves controlled what the pack did. And when they had that control, they always went after the native wild game that was out there. When that control was lost, the pack disintegrated, and you had individual rogue wolves that would go out and start preying on the livestock that was available in the area. So one of the things that when we were originally putting the bill together is we realized, as we've worked on this issue over the years, we've heard a lot of concerns from our agriculture community about the fact that they wanted to make sure that they protected their livestock and protected their investment out there. And that's why, number one, we were focusing on just addressing the recreational hunting. And then number two is, as I did the research, realized that if we really want to protect our livestock out there, protect our agriculture areas, that we should be making sure that we're protecting the wolves in a very disciplined manner. If you try to manage the wolf population with a recreational hunt, that's going to cause problems and cause more damage in the livestock areas. This does not do anything to prevent anything that needs to be done to address the conflicts that do occur in the agriculture area. This bill would still allow trapping of the wolves. It would also allow hunting of selected wolves that were causing issues within our agriculture community. So having heard those as issues over the years, I think we've been able to address some of that in this bill. I would ask for a green vote. I would also ask for a roll call on this.
A roll call has been requested. Do I see 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend the Fisher Amendment to Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A35.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Fisher, I don't want to talk about the hunting component of your bill. I want to talk about your efforts to restabilize the wolf population. And I'm just thinking creatively with my colleagues, and I thought, what better way to possibly reintroduce or to strengthen the wolf population than, as my button says, to maybe introduce them into Fort Snelling or some of the other parks here, possibly in the metro area where the food sources would be abundant and the pressure with cattle and ranchers would be virtually eliminated because there wouldn't be any cattle there to have problems with. And I think that what we could do is take the approximate number of 2,600 wolves that we've got in the state today, which is the largest population in the lower 48. I think that if we were to move some breeding groups into the local area, that we would find some good success. So, Fort Snelling or perhaps a park near you would be a good place to maybe expand the wolf population. And what a wonderful thing to hear them howl at night. I know that when I'm up north, I really enjoy hearing them howl at night. And I just think that it's a fantastic idea and welcome your support.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fully support this amendment, and I'll be speaking a little more detail on this issue. After a while, we really would like to leave some of this to the folks that live every day, day in, day out, in wolf country. So, this is an opportunity for you folks to have your pets at risk. We take wolves right now to protect human safety where I live and further north. So, again, I support this amendment. What's good for the goose, good for the gander.
Further discussion, Representative Hansen.
Members, please vote no on the amendment to the amendment.
Representative Nash.
Well, Madam Speaker, I guess I'm just a little surprised. I thought if we wanted to do what's right by the wolf population and find a very smorgasbord for them of flora and fauna so that they could expand their numbers, we'd want to locate some of them here. So I guess, though, Madam Speaker, this is lighthearted, and I'm going to withdraw this amendment. Well, apparently, Representative Fabian, hold that thought. Representative Fabian, we'll be right back.
Representative Fabian.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I recognize, because I've had this similar amendments in the past. And Representative Fisher, I know you're passionate about this, but my folks are too. And what I don't like is what we refer to as the NIMBY attitude around here. Why wouldn't you want a pack of wolves along the Minnesota River someplace here in the metro area? And the portrayal that what's going on in farm country and how the ag country, how this is causing problems there. Members, I can tell you what's causing the problems, okay? It's the wolves that are eating our cattle, livestock of all kinds. I can show you the pictures, the turkeys. You all like to have free-range turkeys. You know how many growers? Minnesota, #1 producing turkey state in the nation. 44 million of them. We learned a lot about that a couple of years ago. They raise them in my district. How many free-range turkey operations are there in the state of Minnesota out of 44 million? I mean, it is hardly any. Why? Largely due to predators. And I'm not even coming close to suggesting that we change things drastically. Representative Fisher, you talked about a bald eagle. I mean, bald eagles eat young turkeys. They get them, okay? I get it. But the idea that we shouldn't be controlling the population of the wolves, to me, it just doesn't sell in my area. So, and I recognize what Representative Nash's amendment is, and I'll probably speak a little bit more about this, but members, let's let the biologists and so forth, and again, I respect some of the things that are involved in Representative Fisher's presentation here, but what I don't want to do is create even more problems in northern Minnesota. The wolf range is expanding significantly. We have wolves just in the north end of the suburbs here now. Carlos Avery, I thought I read someplace that they're there. So thank you for the conversation. I'll let Representative Nash, if he so wants. Madam Speaker, you can do whatever you want. I know that. Thank you.
Members, reminder, we are on the amendment to the amendment. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to rise in strong opposition to this amendment. I respect the fact that there are unique problems in rural Minnesota, but I represent a district in southern Dakota County where we have a different type of problem. We have a huge cougar problem. We got a huge cougar control problem. And Representative Hansen, you and I both know we represent Dakota County. The situation with cougars in Dakota County are totally out of control. Absolutely out of control, particularly at night and on the weekends. You simply cannot walk around without hearing a story about another young man who's defenseless, attacked by these cougars, who are jeopardizing public safety. So I appreciate the problem we have, the rural friends have with wolves, but Representative Hansen, back me up on this. In Dakota County, we are overwhelmed with cougars, and it needs to stop, but I don't know how to stop it.
Representative Nash withdraws his amendment. Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And yes, it's lighthearted, but I will withdraw.
Representative Nash withdraws his amendment. To the Fisher amendment, any discussion? I'm sorry, Representative Lueck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A couple points here. First of all, Representative Fisher took a 2-year window that frankly is being really misrepresented. I've been following this since I've been a kid, which is a fair amount of years ago. That wolf population goes up and down based on deer, based on climate. This idea that you go in and you disturb that pack a little bit, and all of a sudden everything goes crazy. Well, let me tell you how it works, Representative Fisher. Please, let me tell you how it works. Because I've had to live this along with a whole bunch of my friends that raise cattle. Just south of me, there's a whole strip of beef cattle, folks, and then there's a state forest. Well, there's been a wolf pack there since I've been a kid. That wolf pack gets too big, and they push out the young ones, so it starts moving north. So they ran out of deer. They whacked the first cattle farm, baby calves, larger animals. And so I'm talking about a little stretch of about 25 miles north to south. So it starts down here, keeps coming. Right away, we got to bring in the federal guys because we can't do anything on our own to stop this train wreck. So you know what they had to do? 17 wolves they took out of there over 2 years to stop it. They took them all out. Yes, they took them all out. You know why? Because we couldn't exercise some targeted management. They couldn't open that area up down there where you had a pack that was growing leaps and bounds and remove a few. And this is repeated, it's been repeated year after year after year for 30 years. So you can, frankly, I appreciate, I heard in committee, I'll just say tall tales, supposedly peer-reviewed information, and I can tell you it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. We used to have a lot of sheep in my country. They're gone. There is no way that you can successfully raise sheep in where I live. And this is a really jaded joke. But we used to say when there were a lot of guys and gals that were raising sheep around us, thank God for the sheep farmers. You know why? Because sheep are a lot easier for a wolf than a full-grown cow. But it's just time to allow this to go on its way. That management plan was put together 20 years ago with great 3 years of work. I was directly involved in that on the initial roundtable. the purpose of that ability to use those targeted hunts is to manage the wolves, because we kill about 250 of them a year, whether you like it or not. And what usually happens is it gets far enough that we'll have to eliminate the pack. But you know what? They literally double their numbers every year, and they fill right back in again. So again, folks, this idea that this little snippet of barely 2 years, it isn't even a bump on the chart that we're holding up as science. So folks, I mean, really, let's talk a little bit about you know, Native Americans. Are we going to stop hunting deer? We're going to stop hunting bear? Are we going to stop trapping beaver? Are we going to stop otter? You know, wolves are not the only animal that they consider to be important and sacred. And again, I appreciate that, but let's be careful here, because there's a whole realm of Mother Nature that are considered to be important and part of their culture. But again, folks, this is one, if you haven't walked the walk, if you don't have to deal with this, and you've seen what happens, I've seen what happens time and time again, from well south of me all the way to the Canadian border, clear over to the northwest part of the state. This idea that we're not going to have to manage that is a apex predator, and it has to be managed in a rational manner. And myself included, none of us in agriculture want to see the wolves disappear under any circumstance, but we want to see them managed in a proper way to preserve them. So with that, I just urge a no vote on this amendment.
Further discussion to the amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. For those of you who are new to the chamber, this discussion has occurred and this conversation has occurred for several years. I am going to vote for the amendment, but I recognize that there's a wide variety of opinions about this, and that members are going to vote their districts, and I appreciate the debate, but I would encourage members to vote their districts.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just real quickly, one of the other things that we've talked about in committee over the years is the moose population in Minnesota. The moose population, we've stopped hunting moose in Minnesota because the moose population is declining steadily. And if you ask people who live up in the Arrowhead region of the state, and if you go on the DNR website and you get all the information that's there, about 70% of all new moose calves are killed within the first 9 months or a year, largely by wolves and bears. If we want a healthy and growing moose population, we're going to have to face the issue that we're going to have to control the wolf population. And I can guarantee you, members, that the agriculture community is going to be up in arms over this. I applaud Governor Dayton back in 2011, I believe it was, when the DNR brought the provision forward to institute the season. And I hope that we will continue to have that if they get things straightened out in Washington, D.C., because this is a very, very, members, we appropriated, what, $700,000 in the last biennium for elk and wolf depredation claims. And one of the problems with that whole system is I had a friend of mine between Roseau and Warroad, he figured he lost 12 calves, and they know when calves are gone, because if you've been in the ranch at all, you know that the cows are bellowing when they can't find their calf. Okay? They found 3 of them, parts of 3 of them. The other 9 they couldn't find any parts for, and there's no depredation payment then. Vote red.
Representative Driscowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, you know, Representative Fisher, this is easy to, you know, to look and say, well, wolves are fluffy and we like them, and, you know, we want to do what we can to have as many as we can, and the idea of shooting them is not maybe fun for some people, but the reality is, and it's been pointed out, wolves eat other critters, and they eat a lot of them. They eat moose, they eat cattle, they eat sheep, they eat dogs, they eat cats. They'll even eat little people if the situation presents itself. Members, for those of you that haven't seen the photos before, go to Google. Okay, go to Google and type in pictures of dogs killed by wolves, and then hit images. And you'll find they start at the loin and they clean it up completely, and then they work all the way down the rib cage, and all that remains is the head and the very end of the hind legs and the tail, and that's it. And bones and spinal column in between. That's all that's left. They lick up Fluffy in a hurry. So members, the question is, are you, in your idolizing of the wolf, are you going to pursue it so far that you run over Fluffy? That's the question. Members, would Representative Morrison yield for a question, Madam Speaker?
Can you repeat that, Representative Driscollowski?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Morrison yield for a question?
She will yield for a question. Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Morrison, I don't know if you have seen the damage that wolves do to cats and dogs. The wolf wins every time, and the dog or cat loses every time. What do your constituents think about that type of interaction? Are they so wedded to the idea that we need to not have the ability to control wolves that they're willing to see what happens to Fluffy?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Driscollowski. I have not spoken with constituents about cats. Most constituents that have contacted me are in favor of this. I think that people are concerned. This is about recreational hunting, Representative Driscollowski. I think we're getting a little off course here. Thank you.
Representative Driscollowski.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Morrison, the reality is if you vote for this, you're going to be contributing to the increased likelihood that dogs and cats are going to come into interactions with wolves. And I can tell you, and I encourage you and your constituents to look at the pictures on Google. It's not what you want of your cat or dog. I can tell you that. Would Representative Hewitt yield, Madam Speaker?
Representative Hewitt is not on the floor. Representative Driscollowski.
Okay, would Representative Christensen yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Christensen, I don't know if you're following the discussion, but what do your constituents think about this? Do they want to be able to protect their Fluffy from the wolf that's going to eventually eviscerate them?
Representative Christensen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative, your language is graphic, I will say that. My constituents, for the most part, believe that we need to manage wildlife, but that we, that we need to do it responsibly. I think that's what we're dealing with here. Thank you.
Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Christensen. Well, Representative Christensen, the outcome of reality is very graphic. And when it happens, you can't avoid the graphic reality. No matter how hard your brain wants to not engage in that, reality is there. And that's what's happening. Ask the people who live in Duluth and some of the northern Minnesota cities that interact with these wolves. You can just quickly go to Google, another 6 dogs eaten in Duluth. That's an example. Would Representative Tabke yield for a question, Madam Speaker?
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Tabke, where are you at on this? Do you want your constituents
Madam
to have
Speaker.
the ability to
Representative
protect
Becker-Finn,
their
for what
animals
purpose do you
or not?
rise?
Point of order.
State your point of order.
Masons 121-3, a member who resorts to persistent irrelevance or to persistent repetition after the attention of the House has been called to the matter may be directed to discontinue the speech by the presiding officer.
Members, I'm going to remind the body of decorum and our Masons rules in debate. I also will remind the body that it is the subject of the matter at hand. We are on the A16 amendment.
Madam Speaker?
Representative Dowd.
I know you've kind of already made your decision on that point of order, but actually custom and usage in this chamber is higher precedence than Mason's manual, and custom and usage is that persistent irrelevance is certainly appropriate here on the House floor.
I am going to defer ruling on the point of order. Thank you, members. Representative Drazkowski.
So, Madam Speaker, my comments were the same. I have 12 years of custom and usage here, Madam Speaker, and this type of discussion has been going on the House floor for 12 years. Now, Representative Becker-Finn, you may want to consider somebody's irrelevance in their discussion irrelevant, and somebody else may want to claim it's very relevant. I believe this is very relevant discussion, and I think that that's, well, you know, you can say, well, the speaker's going to overrule you, and she has that ability to do that.
Representative Drazkowski, I'm going to remind you that it is the rules of our chamber that we address the speaker when having debate. It helps maintain decorum within our discussions and debate, and I would appreciate members' discussion around Amendment A16. As I stated, I deferred ruling on the points of order, and we are on the A16 amendment. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and members, and Madam Speaker, is Representative Tabke still yielding?
He is. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, Representative Fisher's amendment would prohibit the hunting of wolves in Minnesota, or the killing of wolves in many cases. And what that will lead to, Madam Speaker, is the inability for the reduction in population in certain areas where it gets out of control, and the interaction, Madam Speaker, of the wolves and domestic animals will increase to the detriment, Madam Speaker, of Minnesota landowners, Minnesota homeowners, and Minnesota owners of Fluffy and Fluffy's cat neighbor. But Madam Speaker, I'm curious, as Representative Tabke is yielding, I'm curious what Representative Tabke's constituents would think of this if indeed suddenly their constituents would find that the potential for Fluffy to be eaten in their backyard would increase because of his vote.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and Representative Drazkowski. I appreciate this question. This is something, it's not an easy topic whatsoever that I feel you're making fairly light of, which is frustrating and not the way we should be having debate. But this is a topic that I've talked to many of my constituents about, and my district is fairly evenly split. I have many, many hunters who I support and want to make sure that they have the ability to do what they want. I also have very many people who, many folks who are extremely concerned about the habitat for wolves, and wolves being a prevalent part of our state, and what we can do about that. So this is a very split issue in my district, and I appreciate good, honest discussion about things like this, and you're not doing anything to sway me to your side at this point. So I appreciate the discussion as we move forward, but this is a very split decision in my district.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Tabke. Well, Representative Tabke, it may actually be that it appears and sounds to be light to you, but the reality is it's real. And I don't intend it to be light. It may be light to you because of your unfamiliarity with the reality. And the reality is that the dog loses every time. And even Representative Tabke, your wiener dog that's going to chase a bear up the tree and to have the hunter shoot it and then have it land on the ground in front of them. And I'm curious of whether your constituents appreciate your bill on that or not. But we'll leave that for a later discussion. Representative Tabke, would Representative Wozlowick yield for a question, Madam Speaker?
She will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Wozlowick, have your constituents contemplated what it will mean if they are going to, because of this amendment that Representative Fisher is bringing, end up having more and more interactions with wolves and less of their pets surviving?
Representative Wozlowick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have received several emails in favor of Representative Fisher's amendment, and that is how I intend to vote for the amendment.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Wozlowick. I will look forward to see whether you and others are going to vote for this amendment. But the reality is you are voting, in this case, for the wolf in the wolf and pet interaction. And Fluffy's coming out the short end of the stick on this. And I think Fluffy exists in a lot of your yards and a lot of your constituents' yards. And they may want to consider your actions, members, as you increase the likelihood that their Fluffy may disappear and become a visual reality that they indeed don't want to have to face. So with that, Madam Speaker, I encourage a no vote on the Fisher Amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Seeing no further, I apologize. Representative Nelson N. from Kennebec. Pine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I farm. We've had wolf depredation on our farm. We've had the trapper out. And last year I lost about 12 calves. I can't prove every one of them. It's because I've got zero sign of them. 2 of them, we found their carcasses. And so then we can get reimbursed for that. But in talking with the conservation officer, most likely when the calf is absolutely gone, no trace of it, that's the most likely that it was a wolf. And, you know, rules being rules, we're not able to be compensated for them. Overall, I could be fine with no hunting season, provided that nuisance animals can be controlled, and I believe that's part of this. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. To Representative Drazkowski, my dog won one time. I was chopping hay. My dog loved to run with me, and about 50 feet away, she ran past me, and there was a wolf right behind her. Fortunately, my screaming and I lost my voice. The wolf did deter her after tackling her. She'd have needed a few stitches from that, but she did win. So there's one time a dog won anyway. So, but anyway, it is an issue in our area, and I think the population does need to be controlled and need to be managed. And I think that one thing that I would really like to see out of this is when an animal is trapped and removed, that right now the animal is destroyed, the pelt is lost, nothing is kept. And I think if something were to be allowed to be able to keep the pelt from that, they are a quite majestic animal. And not to see everything go to waste from that. I think that would be a good provision that should be added, in my estimation. But it's something that is important in my area. Pine County is one of the highest areas for wolf depredation in the state on livestock. and it's something that my neighbors, my friends, they get affected by it every year. So thank you.
The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm rising to point out something in our Masons on parliamentary right to the floor, Section 90, Chapter 10, just to counter what has been proposed on this floor in another interruption. Debate is the essential feature of a legislative body. It means by which the opinions of members are exchanged, questions are deliberated, and conclusions are reached on the business before the body. Members have the right to try to persuade the majority to accept their views, and there can be no legal wrong from such an attempt. Again, that's Section 90, Chapter 10 in Masons.
Further discussion to the A16 amendment. Representative Fisher. Representative Fisher passes. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 65 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fisher moves to amend Senate File 2314, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A14.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this bill is dealing with property rights. This would address the situation of placing traps and snares on private lands. Basically, it would just require that before somebody places a trap or a snare on private land, they would make the request and get written permission from the landowner. This is something that 22 other states already do. It would still allow trappers to set traps on private land as long as they've received permission beforehand. It should be noticed that currently in areas where there's agriculture going on, this is already the practice where they have to receive permission before trapping on it. Under current law, if you are a private landowner and it is not agriculture, you need to post your property with no trespassing signs every 500 to 1,000 feet every year. Under this proposal, this would take care of that. It shifts the burden from the landowner to the trapper. This would not affect hunting on private land. It would also not affect crossing private land to set on traps, check traps, or to retrieve any game that has been hunted and wounded. This is a straightforward amendment. This is something that some of my members of my district have brought forward to me. They are concerned because they've got cabins in northern Minnesota, and some of them have lost their pets up there because traps were placed on their land without permission, and it's caused them concern about continuing to keep their cabins in northern Minnesota. At this point in time, I would ask for a green vote and ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Do I see 15 hands? I do not see 15 hands.
Madam Speaker?
Representative Fisher.
I would like to withdraw the amendment.
Representative Fisher withdraws the amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 2314, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are some really good things in this bill, particularly on the AIS spending. We'd like to see a lot more go into that area, and that's a problem wherever we got lakes. So I appreciate Chair Hansen's work in that area, and this remains a work in progress. With some regret, though, I can't support this bill as is, particularly with that with Representative Fisher's successful amendment on the wolf situation. That's not going to work. And there are a couple other areas where we still need some work on this. So I appreciate Chair Hansen's work here. And again, you know, there is some important stuff on aquatic invasive species, but this time around, I can't support the bill. So I'll be voting no.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I would echo Representative Lewick's comments relative to there are some good things in the bill, and I enjoyed the work that went into putting it together, but there are some things very specifically that impact Crow Wing County that I have to discuss, have to talk about as we're about to vote. Because this bill raises fees on fun, and Crow Wing County is, in my opinion, the capital of fun in the state of Minnesota. This bill is raising fees, as Representative Heinrich said, on paddle boards, pontoons, fishing boats, ski boats, kayaks. In some parts of the state, you know, maybe folks won't feel that, but in Crow Wing County, it's going to be significantly more expensive to have fun. This bill wastes taxpayer money on residential landscaping projects for bees. I'm a beekeeper. I understand what we're talking about. I appreciate what we're trying to do. We're going to take and we're going to spend over $700,000 in this bill to replace a perfectly good lawn, presumably, with a pollinator-friendly lawn. Well, that's fine, but do it on your own dime. Spend your own money to do that. That shouldn't be something that the taxpayer is supposed to pony up and cover somebody else's lawn project. This bill grows government with spending agencies don't even want. Representative Lewick talked about that. Representative Fabian mentioned that creating this agency inside of another agency is something that not even government wants. Explore Minnesota Tourism doesn't need another agency within itself. As a watershed district manager, often I'd have constituents, I guess you could say constituents, come to me, folks that I represented on that watershed district or in that watershed district, and they'd talk about projects across Crow Wing County that they felt were really important. And say, for example, you had a little bay in Lake Edward, and you want to do a restoration there. There's a lot of vegetation. Crappies used to spawn in that area, no longer there. Can't fish there, can't use the water there like you used to. Mr. Heisman, can we do something over here? Could we maybe do a little work and kind of make a way for that environment to be restored? We have narrowleaf cattail filling up the bay. Unfortunately, the answer was, well, wait a minute, now we got to check with DNR, we have to get permits, we have to check with the Corps of Engineers, probably get permits there, MPCA, work with the Lake Association, local government, state government at every level. Hard to do that, hard to get a project going that virtually everybody could support, and creating another agency inside of government creates those kind of boundaries in districts like mine, where we are the capital of fun, and you're trying to create things like Cuyuna, the mountain biking trails there, or maybe work on a restoration project like I was discussing in my watershed district. Trying to make more opportunities for fishable, swimmable waters. So members, I would encourage a no vote.
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate the debate on the bill today. Just a couple of things that I want to point out. Representative Winkler, I talked to Representative Sauk before the debate started on this with regards to this bill having not gone to GovOps. Madam Speaker, if Representative Winkler would yield to a question, please.
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Winkler, I firmly believe that this bill, because of the provisions in there with regards to the formation of the new division within Explore Minnesota Tourism, the outdoor recreation portion, that this bill really should have gone to GovOps Committee. I talked to Representative Sauk earlier, and he told me that Representative Freiberg is keeping a list of some things that maybe have to go to GovOps. Would you agree, and would you think that this portion in the bill should go to the GovOps Committee?
Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, Representative Fabian, under House rules, if there is a provision of a bill that creates a state agency, creates a state board or a commission, or affects the operations of government, it should be heard in the Government Operations Committee. If there is a provision in a bill, including an omnibus bill, that has not been heard, we can send a separate bill to the Government Operations Committee to at least make sure it is heard. We will not be re-referring our omnibus bills to GovOps, however.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this bill, as people have pointed out, has got some good stuff in it, the AIS spending and so forth. It's interesting that the fee increases that they have on fun, paddle boards, pontoons, and you name it, the governor asked for an increase of $2.25. In this bill, they're raising those fees by $15. In 2017, there were some comments made on the House floor about things that just magically appeared in the bill that we put together in 2017. Members, the lead shot ban that's in this bill, to the best of my knowledge, never had a hearing. It's not dark outside yet, but it's getting close. Representative Heinzman mentioned the money we're going to spend to tear up people's lawns and give them a grant so that they can plant things for bees and so forth. They should be doing that on their own dime. Another thing that's going on in this bill, members, I've only been here this is the start of my 5th term. We are making contingent appropriations. On page 42 and 43 of the bill, if the gas tax goes up, then we will do something with the money that we may get. And on page 43, if the solid waste tax goes up, we'll spend $400,000 the first year, $750,000 the first year on things. Members, I don't believe that this is a responsible way to govern. We're growing government agencies with spending that they don't want. We're raising fees on fun. Representative Fisher, I know how passionate you are about your provision in here, but just that alone would cause me to vote against the bill. I really sincerely appreciate Representative Hansen, your commitment to continuing the discussion with regards to what's going on in our WMAs. And members, I would encourage a red vote. Thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the problem with amendments is sometimes we get off track and about some of the good things that are in our omnibus bills. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the good things that are in this bill. This is, as Chair Hansen noted, is a problem-solving bill. There's a lot of problems that we discussed in committee and are addressed in this bill. A couple of provisions that I personally am really passionate about that I'm excited that we're able to bring forward in this bill and that we'll be bringing to conference. So the No Child Left Inside grant program, We've had support. It continue every single day. I hear from another person from throughout Minnesota that's excited about the No Child Left Inside provisions in this bill. So essentially, that we'd be able to set up a grant program to help get kids outdoors that otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to be outdoors, and that addresses some of our recruitment issues in our hunting and fishing sports. And really excited that we can bring that forward and get more kids outside. It really addresses a lot of problems as far as health issues and kids better being connected to our world. Another provision that's in this bill that I think members have been hearing about is the flame retardants, the ban on certain flame retardants, PFAS chemicals that will protect the health of our children and firefighters. It's extremely important to address this now. Firefighters have a disproportionate rate of cancer, and that has to do with the unnecessary chemicals that are really added to furniture, clothing, a lot of things that we don't need those chemicals in. And finally, I wanted to talk about chronic wasting disease. And, despite what may have been said on the House floor in the last week, deer hunters have really been paying really directly the cost of chronic wasting disease for years through our deer hunting license fees. Really disproportionately, the money has been coming from there, and this bill has over $4.5 million going to address chronic wasting disease in different aspects. One of those is the Adopted Dumpster program, which would also set up guidelines for handling, processing, and disposal of carcasses, of deer carcasses, and that's in recognition of the unique problem we have with chronic wasting disease, it being a prion disease, and it being a disease that is not as easy to eradicate as a typical bacteria or virus. And that will provide guidance to our meat processors, taxidermists, hunters, kind of across the board. It's a really good thing that we're doing. So just wanted to point out some of those good things in the bill. Thank you, Chair Hansen, for your leadership. Also excited, of course, about some of the pollinator things that we're doing here. And members, I encourage you to give this a green vote. I think there's something for everyone in this bill. It's a good bill, and I'm proud to be voting in support of it.
The member from Dakota, the author of the bill, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I ask you for a yes vote for this problem-solving omnibus environment finance bill. I'm going to reference a couple things that, you can laugh, it's okay. A couple of items that we haven't talked about. The bill contains provisions protecting our water from road salt, sets up a road salt certification program. It provides funding from the remediation fund to reimburse dry cleaners. I'd ask each of you to think about your mom and pop dry cleaner in your district, and we're going to try to provide, some of them have waited years to be reimbursed from the fund. We are going to be reimbursing and helping those small businesses with their cleanup costs. We'll be reducing the amount of carpet going into landfills with a product stewardship program for carpet recycling. We reinstate the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Citizens Board to provide more citizen involvement in our environmental decision making. It has a provision on waste tires to try to deal with waste tire problems in our environment. And then it has the acronyms that we mentioned. Taking action on aquatic invasive species, emerald ash borer for the first time, a comprehensive approach that's going to help us in our communities. And chronic waste and disease, $4.4 million for response and research. $4.4 million for response and research to chronic waste and disease. And a response to the pollinators, whether you are in rural areas, on the farm, in the suburbs, or in the cities. We need to pay attention to the small things. We're all part of the web of life. And I would ask your support for this omnibus bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 60 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.